My name is Ellen Rose Wallace, and I'm an Irish artist based in County Roscommon. So I grew up very much so in the countryside on the shore of GlogauAIR. And so this has always been a huge source of inspiration for my work. And I tend to kind of come home to the countryside to gather materials and to gather stories. I studied sculpture and combined media at Limerick School of Design. And this course encourages a freedom to kind of experiment with different modes of working, which eventually led me to developing a multimedia practice where I use sculpture and film and photography, sometimes performance and 3D animation. Developing from a very early fascination with folklore and fairy stories and oral tradition, my work is kind of concerned with how we conceptualize time and history and narrative, and also how we conceptualize time through narrative structures such as history and mythology. So I'm interested in how during times of societal upheaval, our experience and depictions of reality are changed and altered. So within my own work, I like to explore experiential time by paying attention to cycles in nature. And often these cycles are framed through found objects that symbolize transition. And they're objects that kind of symbolize the remnants of human production, things that we leave behind us. So sometimes it's a door, or sometimes it's a discarded boat. And then sometimes it's an ancient stone structure, or like flaking wallpaper. But these objects kind of act as inaccurate horological instruments. So sometimes they'll cast a shadow, or sometimes they'll fill with water. And that kind of allows me to observe the patterns of time and the passage of time through these images. So it used to always start with a story, but lately it started with a word. So I'm interested in kind of etymologies in language, things that remain, like words we don't quite use anymore that don't really make sense, and also silent letters. And kind of most recently, the word antediluvian was a starting point. It's something that's always used to describe something really old, or old-fashioned or outdated, but it means before the flood. And in terms of narrative structures, I find the term really interesting because we're constantly before a flood. We're constantly stuck in the before times. And so this conceptualization of time into endings and beginnings is really interesting to me, especially when we talk about periods of geology, history, mythology, and the kind of intersections between these, because these narratives inform each other. So particularly how certain mythological narratives have influenced our interpretation of the past and future of life. So I think obviously growing up, we have a really, really rich tradition of like oral history, oral folklore. And it's kind of inescapable because it's a constant change. I grew up, as I was saying, right near GlogauAIR, and there's this island called Quaker Island, or the Island of Seven Churches, although there's actually only 6. But in a lot of cultures, the number 7 is the sacred thing. So we like to look for this number 7, and we're constantly kind of reaching towards it. So I became interested in, like, was there ever a 7th church, or what happened to it? And there's all theories of, you know, it was taken away by the fairies and stuff like that. I think what's interesting to me about Irish folklore is, because we're traditionally quite a poor country back in our history, we didn't really have, like, you know, our language was taken, stuff like that, but things will pop up through our oral tradition. But I think what's interesting as well is in Irish mythology, everything is such a mystery because things weren't really written down until Christian monks, and everything was changed. So within our folklore and our history and our mythology, there's a lot of room for play. But also in terms of folklore, I think with any culture, what's interesting is the idea of superstition. And I'm interested in the idea of superstition as a kind of illusion of control. So if I go into this church as a woman, this is one of the churches on the island. One of the kind of bits of folklore surrounding that church is women should not go in there. And if a woman goes in there, the woman will die. So if I walk into that church, I will die. But also, if I don't walk into that church, maybe I won't die. So it's this kind of thing of like trying to prevent things and trying to hold on to whatever kind of power over reality that we might have. So within my kind of current work, I'm looking at this kind of rituals, kind of superstitions. To an extent, I'm interested in worship as prevention. So in the work I'm developing, there's this structure that kind of resembles an Irish holy well. And in Ireland, we have this tradition called rounds, and it varies based on parish, but it's kind of, people will go to the wells on a particular day and then they'll circle them over and over a particular amount of times. But this is worship, and this is prayer, and this is ritual. And I'm interested in kind of the why. And within my current work, it's kind of about the prevention of a flood, or the attempt to prevent a flood, which is inevitable. So the characters they kind of interact and they form rituals. So I find that kind of element of being inspired by folklore and kind of taking it into a more modern piece of work, I find that interesting. So